So the first book I want to talk about, which I read and finished last week, is a book called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. This book was of interest to me because I had read Cal's previous book called Deep Work and I really liked it. I did not like this book as much as I liked Deep Work, but that was a tall bar to begin with in any case because I really liked that book. This book is probably, uh, to me at least, less interesting than that book because I already agree with most of the stuff that is in here. And this book is about how we should use a technology or rather internet technology to enhance our lives instead of enhancing the enhancing the rather than this is about the need for us to use technology instead of being used by technology. So Cal Newport makes a case that first of all he goes on to prove that technology, constant and never-ending use of social media technology has serious bad repercussions for our mental health and our professional lives. Second, he makes the case for a kind of detox which involves not abandoning technology altogether, but uh, monitoring, first of all becoming aware of the kind of bad influence it has on our life, and then doing a little bit of pruning, like realize which technologies you really need, which technologies you don't at all need, which technologies are bad for you, and then removing the parts that are not necessary, and then the parts that are necessary, exactly how much effort do you want to put into using it. So that's what this book is about. There is a thing called a 1 month experiment where you go off social media completely but don't tell anyone. And when you come back, you take account of all the things that I just mentioned, and then you design a new kind of life. The goal is to create time that you can use for deep activities, such as reading. So this has been Digital Minimalism. I really recommend this book for someone who's not read anything on these lines before. I have a few books in the shelf also that I like to call, that I might call technophobic books, or rather, books that encourage a kind of healthy suspicion of technology. This book is called The Cult of the Amateur: How Today's Internet is Killing Our Culture and Assaulting Our Economy. As you can tell from the title and the subtitle, this book is more about the culture that the internet is inculcating. It's not necessarily only about social media, but about internet in general. It's a bit older, about 10 years old, and so probably, I mean, expectedly does not have much to say on social media, but it does say a lot about how uh, quality work in the form of deep work, which is the name of the book that Cal Newport wrote that I have read previously, how quality work is suffering because of the kind of working habits the internet is encouraging people to have. The next book is Free Ride by Robert Levine. It's about how the internet is destroying the culture business and how it can fight back. This one is about, as you can tell, the entertainment industry, the book industry, and how the internet is having certain effects on it that are not ideal. So feel free. And this book is called I Disorder: Understanding Our Obsession with Technology and Overcoming Its Hold on Us by Larry Rosen, PhD. This book came out around the time that the world was transitioning from Blackberries to iPhones. So it is understandably about our mobile obsessions. Again, not much to do with social media, but a lot to do with mobile phone addiction. And also, it's kind of old. But as you can tell, I have a bit of an obsession with books like this, primarily, probably because a lot of my work involves the internet and technology and social media. So I like to have the opposing view also. I like to expose myself to the opposing view so that I may not get carried away into techno utopianism, into the worldview that everything technological is good for humanity or us or our children. So, yeah, that is where I am right now. The next book, like these are books I read quite some time ago. The book that I finished reading most recently is Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. The next book is, where is it? The next book is also kind of sort of on the same lines, but I have realized this is much more than a tech book, by the way. It's called The Shallows. It looks like a tech book, but it's actually more of a history book. It's about how the internet is changing the way we think, read, and remember. It's by Nicholas Carr. Essentially, this book is about how the human brain reacts to new technologies, how widespread use of a certain kind of technology affects the human species on a wide scale, and how that influence shapes culture. So far, what I have gotten to is that Nicholas Carr thinks that technologies like the timepiece, the clock, and the map, and the technology that we know as writing, these changed the face of human civilization in very fundamental ways. In that, when maps came along, it became expected that places will have different names and borders and stuff. When timepieces came along, the human mind widely began to think of the day as being divided into hours and minutes. In much the same way, when writing came along, the human brain kind of sort of began to think of ideas as began to think of, how do I put this? It began to put ideas into rigorously understandable segments. He gives the example, Nicholas Carr gives the example of writing before the invention of the printing press. And it was writing on tablets or palm leaves. And there was no differentiation between words, and writing was actually quite a cumbersome activity. Reading was also a very cumbersome activity. It was fascinating to know that in ancient times, people used to have their slaves read to them. So this seems like a proto version of podcasting on some level. Because reading was such a tedious activity, they trained some of the slaves in it, and the slaves used to read their books to them. So yeah, slavery aside, it seems very interesting. And then we come to the part of the printing press. The printing press happens, and writing becomes available to a large number of people across the world, at least across the Western world. And as a result of it, writers began to have the expectation that the people who are reading their work will sit and go through it. As in, they will. Previously, they could not have this expectation because reading was tedious. But writers began to have the expectation that if they write something in a clear enough manner, there is no dearth of people out there who will sit and spend time with it. So a kind of literary ethic became the defining characteristic of this medium. And this was not only shown in novels and magazines, etc., novels and periodicals, etc. It also began to show in the writing of science books and history books. Nicholas Carr gives the example of the book Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. The literary merit of the book, he says, was a result of the expectation in the minds of writers that people will sit through the book. They will appreciate the detail of the writing. And Nicholas Carr then proceeds to say that there came a time when this kind of expectation, this kind of deep thinking, deep reading, sitting and reading a book silently, has had an impact on the human brain, in that reading is not simply an act like watching a video, because when you're reading, the same parts of your brain light up, apparently, as they would if you were doing the actual thing. So if you're reading about an adventure, your brain lights up in the same places as when you are having an adventure. I'm not saying that reading an adventure book is a replacement for actually going on an adventure. I'm only talking about how the human brain reacts to deep reading. And by deep reading, I mean the act of sitting down, spending hours on one concentrated dose of knowledge created by one writer who evidently would also have to be good at writing. I'm at a part of the book that is called The Church of Google. And Nicholas Carr goes into details about how Google as a company has made a lot of things easier for us, but also it has created a lot of complications as far as matters of culture are concerned. For example, Nicholas Carr obviously is in favor of consuming a book at a deep level. But he also points out that projects like Google's book project, Google Books, and other projects that are similar in nature are kind of turning the book into, they're taking the book in, like the book is a concentrated dose of something, like something you spend hours or days with. And this culture is taking that and turning it into a bunch of snippets. So you have seen, right? There are apps and programs and even people who say how to read more books, how to read 10 books a month, or how to read faster, how to maximize your reading output, which is a very productivity oriented way of looking at these things. And the problem that Nicholas Carr is pointing at is that culture as we know it right now is a result of a lot of people having a lot of deep thoughts and a lot of other people being able to access those deep thoughts in a concentrated way. And when that turns into, you know, a series of quotations, there are books that nobody has read despite them quoting those books. There are books that are promoted as must reads, and everyone has read like 4 or 5 quotations from those books. And that is the culture that Nicholas Carr is kind of warning about. There are other issues also, which is that the culture of Google is very computational. It has encouraged thinking of the human mind as a computer, as if it is something that can be broken down into the components of a machine. And there is significant amounts of evidence to suggest that the human brain is actually not like a computer. The way our brains process memories is different from the way a machine processes memories. We have gone into the topic of neuroplasticity before, and Nicholas Carr points out that a computer, if you put something in the computer's memory, that memory will remain the same. You can take that memory unit out, you can put it in another device, it will work the same way. But the way the human brain processes memory is more dynamic. What it does is that it takes in information, processes it, and turns it into understanding, which is what I've spoken about before also. And Nicholas Carr is of the opinion that if we start thinking of the human brain as a machine, we will also fall into the trap. We may also fall into the trap of thinking of the human brain as something that should be treated like a machine. So when we read a book, we are inputting information into our brain, but it is not the same kind of inputting information that you do with a machine. You cannot break a book down into a bunch of snippets and expect it to have the same impact as the reading of that book has. Nicholas Carr gives us plenty of good quotations in this book, and I know I just talked about a book being turned into a snippet, but there is a little bit of this book that I want to read out to you. It's just 2 paragraphs, and it has to do with our assumption. Like, we are fond of saying that technology is just technology. You can use it in a good way or you can use it in a bad way. But I think if there is one thing I take away from this book, it is that technology comes with its own use cases, and those use cases change us. When we use a technology, we are using the technology, but the technology is also using us. And often, the way that it is using us in, it gives us some abilities, but it also takes something away. And that is what I wanted to, I wanted to read a little bit of this to you. Here it is. When a carpenter picks up a hammer, the hammer becomes, so far as his brain is concerned, part of his hand. When a soldier raises a pair of binoculars to his face, his brain sees through a new set of eyes, adapting instantaneously to a very different field of view. The tight bonds we form with our tools go both ways. Even as our technologies become extensions of ourselves, we become extensions of our technologies. When the carpenter takes his hammer into his hand, he can use that hand to do only what a hammer can do. The hand becomes an implement for pounding and pulling nails. When the soldier puts the binoculars to his eyes, he can see only what the lenses allow him to see. His field of view lengthens, but he becomes blind to what is nearby. Now, take this and apply it to our use of social media. Sure, Being able, the ability to be connected to everyone is great. The ability to reach out and find information whenever you need it is great. These are abilities that technology gives us. But what does it take away from us in return? And if you are of the opinion that it does take something away from us, in what way can we make sure that we don't lose that part of ourselves? Because that part is essential. It's not something, lying by the wayside. It is the ability to understand things. It is what brought us here. And if the ability to understand things is being fragmented on a daily basis through use of social media, or in fact, Nicholas Carr is not even talking about modern day contemporary social media. That's an even bigger problem. He's talking about the way the internet existed in the early 2000s, because this book is that old. So think about the way you are being used by technology. And it's not always innocent use, because massive corporations that own social media platforms are using you to make profits. I'll share something. I was in Bangalore a few days ago. You saw some views. It was overcast, like constantly cold and damp and rainy and everything. The moment I came back, it got really sunny, by the way. But still, the day I left, the sun came out for a little bit in the morning at around 6:30 a.m. And I was in the balcony and I saw it. And my first impulse was to get my phone so that I could take a picture. On my way to my phone, I stopped and realized that I was doing exactly what this book warns us about. The ability to experience something is leaving us. We go to concerts and everyone has a phone out. Everyone is looking at something real through their phones. So I didn't pick up my phone. I came back and I just stood there and I looked at the sun for 3 minutes and I just took it in. I think that is the part of us that is able to contemplate things, the part of us that is able to look at things, feel things, commit them to memory, and have our brain grow it into an understanding. That is the part that is suffering. In later parts of this book, some of the experts that Nicholas Carr cites, he points out that there is a kind of techno utopianism in circulation where people are like, yeah, 21st century, we can do so many things. We are changing fundamentally and it's a good thing. It is a thing, but is it always going to be a good thing? Are there ways in which this might be bad for us? Are there ways in which this might be bad for you?